My parents kicked me out to let my golden sister live there, even though I bought the house. But karma came faster than expected. I'm 37 years old, and have spent the last 15 years developing my career as a senior manager at one of the leading investment banks on Wall Street. This narrative focuses on my complex relationship with my sister Emily, 47. I have to take you back to the beginning to show how we got here. My parents were in their late 40s when I was born, so I was an unplanned child. My mother would frequently tell me that they already had Emily, who was 10 years old at the time, and that she was more than enough. She didn't say this with malice, but rather in a tone that somehow made it worse. She would say we didn't plan for you as she arranged Emily's extracurricular activities or put together her college application paperwork. These innocuous comments, which served as a constant reminder of my position as an afterthought in our family, shaped the background of my early years. I might not even be here if it weren't for my maternal grandparents' persistence. My parents saw me as a burden they hadn't requested, but they were thrilled about the possibility of having a second grandchild. I was an afterthought in my parents' lives, and that was evident right away. They had the same ritual every morning when they dropped me off at my grandparents' house. My father would say to my grandfather, "You wanted her," as he got ready to go to work, jingling his keys in his palm. "She's all yours." My grandparents' house became my true home, a haven where I felt genuinely loved and wanted. They made sure I was fed and taken care of, picked me up from school, helped me with my homework, and took me to the park. I spent hours learning about numbers and problem solving from my grandfather, a retired math professor. He would say, "Numbers never lie. These lessons will influence your future more than you can imagine." My grandmother would help me with my schoolwork every afternoon, ensuring I fully grasped each concept. Her patience seemed limitless. She had taught high school before retiring. She would say, "Knowledge is the one thing no one can take away from you in a forceful yet kind manner." She also taught me to cook as a way to express my creativity and love rather than as a chore. These times spent in their kitchen reviewing my school day and learning how to measure ingredients precisely became some of my most cherished memories. My parents, generally exhausted and a little irritated at having to make the trip. My grandmother would say as she bid me farewell, "Madison, you were the best thing that ever happened to us." In her loving embrace, I could almost forget that I wasn't wanted anywhere else. They became my emotional rock, giving me the stability and affection I lacked at home. My grandfather would often add, "Remember, sometimes the best things in life aren't planned." I learned to live as an afterthought in my own home as Emily got ready for her promising future. My sister just pretended I didn't exist. She wasn't nasty or harsh, but she would lie on the couch, talking on the phone about boys and college applications, completely unaware of me as I played with my dolls in the corner of our shared living room. The difference between how my parents treated Emily and me was clear and consistent. I would hear my mother's proud voice as she talked about Emily's achievements to family or friends. Emily got straight A's again. Emily made the debate team. Emily got accepted to her dream college. They went to all her school function, science fairs, and debating contests. They consistently cited, "We're too tired, we have to work, or you understand, don't you," as excuses for their glaring absence from my events. My grandparents took on the role of my cheerleaders, attending every school function with joy and true pride on their faces. I hoped things would change when Emily went off to college, and I, the daughter who stayed, would finally get noticed. I was completely mistaken. I went from being invisible to being the housekeeper at the age of 14. My mother would call out to me, "Madison, before you even put your backpack down, the house needs cleaning. Start with the bathrooms." Emily's chores were taken up by me, along with a number of additional duties. I got to know the washing machine settings and peculiarities by heart. It became my daily companion as I cleaned, cooked, and kept a home for parents who hardly acknowledged my existence. My father would remark, "You live here, you need to contribute." If I hesitated for a second, he'd add, "Your sister always did her part." By the time I was 14, my mother stopped preparing dinner altogether. One day she just declared, "You're old enough now. We expect dinner ready when we get home from work." Despite these taxing domestic responsibilities, I maintained a stellar academic standing. My teachers encouraged me to compete in a variety of academic events after noticing my abilities in economics and mathematics. To help me prepare, my grandfather would dedicate extra time to teaching me complex ideas well above my grade level. He would proudly say, "You have a gift with numbers, don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Dreaming about college was the only way I could escape. Every night after doing the dishes, I would go to my room and visit university websites, imagining myself on distant campuses far from the never-ending tasks at home. My hard work paid off. Despite my household responsibilities, I maintained straight A's. At 16, I received acceptance letters from several prestigious colleges, including some renowned for their top-notch finance programs. Emily's engagement followed soon after. One Sunday afternoon she bounded in with a tall, smartly dressed man, exclaiming, "Mom, Dad, this is James. We're getting married." You would have thought she had just declared her lottery win. My mother sobbed with happiness, and my father immediately called family members to announce the news. "We'll cover everything," my mother exclaimed. "Our first daughter's wedding has to be perfect." For months our home was consumed with wedding preparations. Every conversation revolved around guest lists, venues, flowers, and expensive outfits. Money flowed like water, and everything was top end. Despite attending the wedding, my grandparents didn't seem to enjoy the extravagance. My grandfather merely shook his head at the champagne fountain, and I saw my grandmother scowl at a sculpture likely more expensive than a semester of college tuition. They probably knew what was going to happen and kept their thoughts to themselves. I gave my parents the wonderful news about my college acceptances while sitting at our dinner table with 3 envelopes spread out before me. My heart was pounding. "That's nice," my mother murmured, not looking up from her meal. "But we can't pay for it. We spent all our savings on your sister's wedding, took out a loan for it. There's nothing left for college." I stumbled, "But you paid for Emily's college." My voice barely above a whisper. "That's different," my mother said in a condescending tone. "We saw potential in her." The ensuing silence was deafening. "You should get a job, save up some money, and take out student loans. That's what responsible adults do," my father added. I had never dared to leave the table without being excused. Grabbing my phone with trembling hands, I dialed my grandmother. In a matter of minutes I was crying in their familiar front door. My grandfather's expression hardened as he listened to my story, though I could not quite read the sparkle in his eyes. They exchanged a knowing glance. After I had told them everything, my grandfather took my hand and said, "Madison, we've been saving for your education." He returned with a folder containing bank statements demonstrating years of meticulous saving. "You can choose any of those universities. We've got you covered." I moved in with my grandparents that evening after packing my essentials. When I told my parents, they were downstairs watching television and hardly looked up. My mother simply said, "Whatever you think is best," while keeping her gaze fixed on the screen. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on, the kind of silence that only comes after a bombshell. My parents' faces contorted from disbelief to shame, and in that brief moment I saw them as they truly were, people who had always expected others to fix their mistakes, to shoulder their burdens, and to clean up their messes. I had been their unpaid laborer, their invisible second daughter, the one they'd hoped would never make waves, let alone make something of herself. "Madison," my mother began, but her voice was weak now, a far cry from the confident, dismissive tone she had used when she spoke about me behind my back. "You can't just—" "Just what, Mom?" I cut her off, my voice steady but my hands trembling with a mixture of anger and vindication. "You can't just steal my life, my house, and my future and expect me to remain silent. This is my home now. You don't get to rewrite history just because you didn't get what you wanted." I saw my father look away, his face flushed with embarrassment, as if he were struggling to find the words to defend himself. But there was nothing left to defend. The truth had been laid bare, and it wasn't kind. For the first time in my life, I was the afterthought, the spare part, the one who was never meant to succeed, never meant to amount to anything. But here I was standing in front of them, with everything they had dismissed and ignored now solidly in my grasp. "We were just trying to help Emily and her family," my father mumbled, his voice cracking. "They've been through so much." "Don't do that," I interrupted sharply, my patience evaporating. "Don't bring Emily into this. This isn't about her, or James, or the twins. This is about you trying to control me, trying to manipulate me like you always have. You've taken everything you could from me, and now you expect me to sit quietly while you strip me of my own inheritance, my own hard work." My mother looked up, but it quickly faded, replaced by the all too familiar look of entitlement. "You should have told us," she said, her voice rising in defense. "You should have told us what you were going to do with the house, instead of keeping us in the dark." "You didn't care about me then," I said, my voice growing quieter, but each word felt like a weight lifting off my chest. "Why should I care about you now? You've never respected me, you've never seen me as anything more than a convenience, something to be used when it was necessary and discarded when it wasn't. I'm not playing that game any more." I turned away from them, feeling the heat of their stares burn into my back as I walked toward the front door. Every step I took away from them felt like a release, as if I were shedding the years of emotional weight that had built up inside me, years of walking on eggshells, of constantly striving to be noticed and valued, only to be ignored. As I reached for the door handle, I heard my father speak again, this time more desperately. "Madison, please don't do this. We need you. You're all we have left." I paused, my hand still on the door. There was a part of me that wanted to turn around, to offer them some kind of sympathy, to offer the love they had always craved but never earned. But that part of me was a ghost of who I used to be. That girl had died years ago, the one who begged for their approval, who worked tirelessly to prove herself worthy of love. She had been buried under layers of rejection and neglect, and no matter how much I wanted to go back to be the person they wanted me to be, I couldn't. Not anymore. I didn't say a word as I opened the door and stepped outside. I could hear them calling after me, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The house was empty when I returned later, that evening, the lights still flickering with the faint echo of their party that had never included me. I walked through the empty rooms, the echo of my footsteps the only sound that filled the space. The place that was supposed to be a symbol of reconciliation, of a new beginning, felt like nothing more than an empty shell, hollowed out by years of resentment, manipulation, and misplaced priorities. The next few days were quiet. My phone remained silent save for a few missed calls from numbers I no longer recognized, friends of my parents, family members, all of them pleading for my forgiveness, asking why I had done what I had done. It was the same old routine, the same manipulation dressed up in new words. But I had no intention of answering. I had spent enough of my life answering to them. Now it was my turn to finally walk away. A few weeks later, the house was listed. I had no attachment to it anymore, and despite the memories it held, I knew it was time to let it. The agent came by one afternoon to take pictures, and as I watched them prepare the listing, a strange sense of finality washed over me. I had worked hard for everything I had, and yet here I was standing in the middle of a space that had never truly been mine. It was just a house after all. The real value had always been in the love and support of the people who truly cared for me, and that had never come from my parents. Soon after, I received a call from a potential buyer, someone interested in making an offer on the property. The conversation was brief, and after reviewing the offer I agreed to the sale. As the paperwork was signed I felt a strange relief settle over me. It was done. The house was no longer a symbol of what I had lost, it was just another transaction, a business deal, the way I had learned to do everything. But it wasn't just the house that had changed. It was me. I spent the next few months refocusing on myself. My career had never been better, and after the painful realization that family wasn't about blood or obligation, I put more energy into building the kind of life I wanted for myself. I became more involved in philanthropic efforts, helping women in finance break through the glass ceilings I knew all too well. I traveled more, learned new things, and made new friends who saw me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. But the greatest change came when I began to think about the kind of family I wanted to build. I made a promise to myself that when I eventually had children, I would be the kind of parent my grandparents had been to me, loving, unconditional, and always there for them. I wouldn't repeat the cycle of neglect and manipulation I had experienced. I would give them everything my parents had failed to give me, the freedom to be themselves, to be loved without strings attached. And as I stood on the precipice of this new life, I couldn't help but think back to my grandparents. They had shown me what real love was, what it meant to be seen, to be valued, and to be respected. They had given me everything I needed to succeed, even when no one else believed in me. Their love had carried me through the darkest times, and now it was my turn to create something better, not just for myself, but for the generations to come. The months that followed my decision were some of the most transformative of my life. The emptiness I once felt, the burden of carrying the weight of my family's expectations, slowly began to fade. My life was no longer defined by the strings they had attached to me. I began to look at the world through a different lens, not through the lens of duty or obligation, but through a lens of possibility. Every decision I made now felt like a step toward becoming the person I had always wanted to be, without the guilt or fear that had once controlled me. I settled into a routine I had never known before. I took long walks through the city, enjoying the quiet moments of solitude, watching the sunset from my balcony, and diving deeper into my work. I became an advocate for young women in my field, offering mentorship and support that had been so sorely lacking when I was starting out. I made connections with people who truly saw me for who I was, who didn't measure my worth based on my relationships or the things I could give. And as I did, I found that I no longer felt the need to explain myself. But the most unexpected change came when I met Alex. He was everything I hadn't known I needed. A quiet, introspective artist who shared my love for literature and history, but also had a deep. We met at an art exhibit of all places. I was there alone, strolling through the galleries, admiring the paintings, when I noticed him standing in front of one of my favorites, lost in thought. Something about the way he was looking at the artwork, the depth of his contemplation, made me want to know more. We began talking first about art, then about life, and eventually about our families. He listened with a kind of empathy I wasn't used to. He understood the pain of family expectations, the weight of being the one who was always expected to keep things together while everyone else fell apart. He had his own version of a strained family, but what I admired most about him was his resilience. He had learned to distance himself without guilt, to create a life that was his, free of the toxic patterns of his past. In him I saw a reflection of myself, a version of me that had already healed and moved forward. But I was not yet whole. I was still learning, still growing. And when Alex became a part of my life, it felt like the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Together we built something beautiful, a life rooted in mutual respect, love, and understanding. He never asked me to be anyone other than who I was. He accepted me, flaws and all. The day I stood in front of my grandparents' house again, now empty and quiet, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It was as if the house had been waiting for this moment, waiting for me to let go. The years of pain, of betrayal, of feeling like an outsider were all gone. It was just a house, nothing more and nothing less. I thought about what it had represented to me in the past, an anchor in a storm, a place of safety, and I realized that it no longer needed to be a symbol of everything I had lost. It had become a symbol of everything I had gained. I had found my own anchor in myself. As I locked the door for the last time and handed over the keys to the new owners, I felt light. It was a gesture of finality, but also of liberation. The house was no longer mine, and neither was the family who had tried to claim me as their own. But I had something far more important now, the love and respect I had always deserved, the kind I had found with Alex, and the trust I had built in myself. I spent the next few years working toward building a family of my own, Alex, and I eventually married in a small ceremony by the sea, surrounded by friends and a handful of people who truly knew us. We didn't invite my parents after everything that had happened. I didn't feel the need to explain myself any further. But we did invite a few close family members, my grandparents' old friends, people who had loved me for who I was, and not for what I could give them. The wedding was everything I had dreamed of, a celebration of love, not obligation. There was no drama, no hidden agendas, just a peaceful, beautiful day filled with laughter and joy. For the first time in my life, as we stood together hand in hand, I looked out at the horizon. The future stretched before us wide and full of possibility. I had no idea what it held, but for the first time in my life I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid of what my parents might think or what anyone else might expect. I was no longer tethered to the past. And with Alex by my side, I knew I was finally free. Free to build a family, a future, and a life that was entirely my own. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one I had written myself, without fear, without guilt, and without apology. And this time the story was mine.